Today is Friday, August 28th, 2026, and today is National Bow Tie Day. And I've always thought a bow tie is one of those things you can't wear accidentally. A regular tie says, I have somewhere to be. A bow tie says, yes, I made a decision, and I'm standing by it. And today, a pharmacist realized his soda desperately needs a better name. 2 teenagers built a delivery company with 100 borrowed dollars, and an automobile empire emerges from a business that made looms. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and someone who's beginning to suspect history has a much better sense of humor than we give it credit for. Caleb Bradham never planned to become a soft drink mogul. He had actually studied medicine, but when his family ran into financial trouble, he couldn't afford to finish. So he became a pharmacist instead, and eventually opened a drugstore in New Bern, North Carolina. And like a lot of pharmacists at the time, Bradham had a soda fountain. This was before grabbing a bottle from a gas station refrigerator. The pharmacist or somebody working behind the counter would mix flavored syrups with carbonated water and serve the drink right there. Bradham enjoyed experimenting with different combinations, and sometime around 1893 he came up with one that people really liked. It was sweet, bubbly, refreshing, and marketed as something that might help with digestion. His customers started calling it Brad's drink, which is honest. Not exciting exactly, but honest. What are you drinking? Brad's drink. Who's Brad? The man standing behind you. The drink became popular enough that Bradham started thinking beyond his pharmacy counter. But if he wanted to turn it into a real product, he needed a name that sounded less like something a guy had mixed in his garage. So he went looking for one. In 1898, Bradham bought the name Pepsi-Cola from a local competitor and adjusted it. On August 28th, his creation officially became Pepsi-Cola. The exact thinking behind Pepsi is a little fuzzy. Pepsi's own history says it was inspired in part by dyspepsia, which is an old term for indigestion. Other historical accounts point out that Bradham never left us a perfectly clear explanation. But either way, Pepsi-Cola sounded energetic, modern, maybe even slightly medicinal, which wasn't a bad thing when you were selling it from a pharmacy. And it was definitely better than Brad's drink. Bradham filed for the Pepsi-Cola trademark, formed a company, and expanded rapidly. By World War I, Pepsi was being sold in 24 states. Then sugar prices went wild. Bradham bought a large supply at high wartime prices because he wanted to protect his production. The price collapsed and the decision devastated the company. Pepsi went bankrupt. Bradham lost control of the business and the brand changed hands repeatedly. But the name survived. Today, it's almost impossible to hear Pepsi and imagine that it began with a small-town pharmacist serving something called Brad's drink over the counter. And 9 years after Pepsi received its new name, another familiar company began with a name most of us wouldn't recognize. In Seattle, 2 teenagers named Jim Casey and Claude Ryan had an idea. They were going to deliver things. That sounds fairly normal now, but this was 1907, when plenty of people still didn't have telephones in their homes. If you needed to get a message across town, sometimes the fastest option was to hand it to a teenager and tell him to start walking. Casey and Ryan borrowed $100 from Ryan's uncle and opened the American Messenger Company on August 28th. Their headquarters was a tiny basement beneath a Seattle saloon. So we've got 2 teenagers, a borrowed $100, a basement under a bar, and a business plan built around running errands. I'm sure absolutely everyone involved felt confident about this. Customers would contact the company, and the boys delivered messages, packages, luggage, pretty much anything they could carry. Most trips were made on foot or by streetcar. For longer distances, they used bicycles. They also recruited other boys, put them in uniforms, and established rules about how they were supposed to behave. They were expected to be courteous, look professional, and apparently not whistle while working. That last one feels very specific. You don't create a no whistling rule unless somebody has already been whistling enough to make it a problem. The company grew, but technology nearly destroyed its original business. As more people got telephones, there wasn't much need to pay a messenger to carry a note across town. So, Casey adapted. Instead of concentrating on messages, the company began delivering purchases for local stores. Customers could buy something and have it brought to their homes, while retailers didn't have to maintain separate delivery crews. In 1913, the company merged with another delivery service and bought its first vehicle, a Ford Model T. Then in 1919, it expanded beyond Seattle into Oakland, California, and adopted a new name, United Parcel Service. That was also the year the company began painting its vehicles brown. The color was meant to suggest professionalism, sophistication, and class, which is a remarkably ambitious message for a company that had started 12 years earlier with two teenagers working in a basement beneath a saloon. But it worked. The basement disappeared. The bicycles gave way to trucks and airplanes. The $100 messenger service became UPS, and those brown vehicles became recognizable almost anywhere. All because two teenagers were willing to answer the phone, grab a package, and start walking. And once you spend enough time talking about getting things from one place to another, eventually you end up talking about the vehicle itself. And for anyone who knows me, they won't be surprised that I picked this one for today. Toyota started with a thread. Not tires, not engines, thread. Sakichi Toyoda was a Japanese inventor who spent years improving textile looms. One of his most important ideas was a loom that could detect a broken thread and stop automatically. That might not sound dramatic, but before that, a machine could continue running after something went wrong, producing defective fabric until somebody noticed. Sakichi's loom noticed. That basic idea, build the machine so it can recognize a problem instead of blindly continuing, became part of the manufacturing philosophy Toyota would eventually carry into automobiles. Sakichi's son Kichiro Toyota also worked on automatic looms, but he became fascinated by cars and believed Japan needed an automotive industry of its own. So, in 1933, Toyota Automatic Loom Works created an automobile department, which still sounds like somebody walked into a textile factory and said, "Good news, we're making sedans now." They studied American vehicles, experimented with engines, and produced their first prototype passenger car in 1935. A truck followed, and then the Model AA passenger car in 1936. But the cars originally carried the family name, Toyota, with a D, not with a T. When the company held public competition for a new logo, roughly 22,000 entries came in. The winning design used Toyota with a T instead. That one-letter change had several advantages. Toyota looked cleaner when written in Japanese characters, sounded better, and required 8 brush strokes, a number associated with prosperity and good fortune. Changing the name also helped separate the growing company from the Toyota family itself. So the company that began with Toyota looms became Toyota Cars, partly because somebody entered a logo contest. And on August 28, 1937, the automobile department officially became Toyota Motor Company. Although even that comes with a twist. Toyota's own corporate history says the company was legally established on this date, but it designated November 3, 1938, the day its new Koromo manufacturing plant was completed, as its official founding anniversary. So Toyota effectively has 2 birthdays, one for the paperwork and one for the moment everything was ready to move. And there's something about a loom company turning into an automaker that makes me think of a boy who looked at a cable connecting 2 handheld video game systems and imagined creatures traveling through it. He grew up in Machida, outside Tokyo, where the area still had rice paddies, streams, forests, and plenty of insects. He loved collecting those insects, not casually either. He studied where they hid, figured out new ways to catch them, and became so good at it that the other children reportedly called him Dr. Bug. But as he grew older, the countryside around him changed. Trees came down, buildings went up. One of the fishing ponds he remembered became an arcade. And that's where he discovered another obsession: video games. He played them, studied them, and eventually started taking gaming systems apart to understand how they worked. Then he saw Nintendo's Game Boy. Most developers looked at this link cable as a way for 2 players to compete against each other. He imagined something different. What if a creature could move through that cable from one player's collection to another? Suddenly, the feeling of searching for insects, discovering something new, bringing it home, and comparing it with what your friends had could exist inside a video game. The idea was simple. Making it work was not. Development took nearly 6 years. His company came close to running out of money. Employees left, paychecks became difficult, and he sometimes went without paying himself. By the time the games were finished, much of the industry considered the Game Boy old technology. The project didn't look like the beginning of a global phenomenon. It looked like an expensive game about tiny creatures for a handheld system that might be nearing the end of its life. But the game slowly caught on. Children collected the creatures, battled them, and most importantly, traded them. That boy was Satoshi Tajiri, born on August 28, 1965. He was the creator of Pokémon. Even the main character's original Japanese name, Satoshi, carries a piece of him into the story. The boy, once nicknamed Dr. Bug, had found a way to preserve his childhood world inside a Game Boy. There's a particular kind of creativity in carrying an old fascination into a completely different machine. The object changes from thread to engines, or from insects to pixels, but the attention underneath it remains. Maybe reinvention works best when it remembers where it came from. Anyway, I may celebrate National Bow Tie Day by attempting to tie one without looking like I lost a wrestling match with a ribbon. If it goes badly, there's an old Japanese proverb waiting for me. Even monkeys fall from trees. If you'd like to hear more of my narration work, audiobooks, podcasts, or other projects, you can find everything at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and thanks for taking this weird little walk through history with me. I'll see you tomorrow.